welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in today. Hope you're having yourself a really, really good Wednesday. Really appreciate you joining us here this afternoon. We're going to talk a lot about food and agriculture today. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you are watching on YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter, or Twitch, you can participate in the show. That's the beauty of this program. It's what makes it so unique. All you have to do is enter your question or comment in the box on any of those programs that you are watching on. Just actually today, a new report was released by the Nourish network, and it is called the Annual Trend Report for Food, Beverage, and Agriculture for 2021. And the leader of that project joins us here today on the show. It is JoAnns McArthur. Hey, JoAnns, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Shaun?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. I'm doing good. Hey, you know what? I'm honestly looking forward to, I've got some questions for you, but I'm looking forward to the audience participating too. And just like yesterday, if you ask a question and I read it, I'm giving you some of these sweet agriculture hats. So they're special edition, I guess. We'll call them that. That's marketing right there. Okay, JoAnns, give us some background on yourself and what Nourish food marketing does.
Sure. I like to say we know a lot about a little, so we're specialists in food and beverage. In terms of my background, client side, so worked for Procter & Gamble, Unilever, ended my career client side as president of a division of Molson Breweries, and started an agency, the kind of agency I always wanted when I was a client, never could find. And we got a food client early on, still have that food client, I'm proud to say, and we decided let's specialize. And we work across the entire food ecosystem. So producers, processors, manufacturers, retailers, food service, associations, not-for-profit. So I like to say we're in a very kind of privileged place where we can maybe connect dots about what the future and what trends are going on that others may not be able to see yet.
How difficult was it to put together a trend report for the coming year after what we have experienced in 2020?
Yeah.
Is 2020 sort of the buck all trends, and it's just sort of like, well, here's what we thought going into 20, and we're just going to continue on, or has it created changes that are forever impacted here in the short term, I guess, at least?
Yeah, it's fine. We always try to tell people the difference between trends and fads. So, fads like, oh, the color green or charcoal ice cream. And trends are, sort of the major shifts in society. But COVID was just this earthquake that's just upended everything. And this year's report was a lot more crystal balling in some ways because, you can always say that past behavior is a pretty good predictor of future behavior. But, there's been a lot of forced behavioral changes this year. And some of those will continue. There'll be a legacy of COVID. We won't go all the way back to what it was.
Well, our audience is farmers and ranchers across the country. So what do you think are some of the key findings or trends you've identified in this report that they really, really need to be aware of?
I would say the curtain has fallen between ag and the consumer. And it's interesting because, when I talk to my other ag clients, they always want to keep the consumer at a distance, right? They don't want to, they want to go off and do the good work they do, deliver the food and let the consumer do their thing with it. But for the first time, the veil fell. For the first time, consumers went into stores and they saw empty shelves. And don't get me wrong, the food system did a great job. It bended a bit, but it didn't break. And, food kept going to the supermarket, but still it shocked people. And then we saw these front news stories about migrant workers, about meat processing plants. And, we look at what consumers are Googling, and all of a sudden you see these spikes in searches around meat processing, food supply, food security, all of these terms that may have been an ag or an industry term, but had never made it into the consumer vocabulary. And so now that veil's kind of dropped, I think, it's time for maybe a little more transparency and inviting consumers virtually, not literally, in a little bit more, because, we know that consumers trust farmers, but they don't necessarily trust farming as much as they should.
Then there is a difference there between the two. Um, do you have an example of where that's kind of where that's happening and that's going well and maybe is kind of a benchmark for other areas of the industry to sort of aspire to be?
Yeah, I mean, we always tell our clients show rather than tell. So, it's great to have like a certification symbol on the front of your meat or your, eggs or dairy. But it's even more powerful for consumers to actually see conditions in a video or, taking it all the way to live streaming. Like there are some egg producers in the US, for instance, Vital Eggs, where they actually live stream the conditions of the hens that lay the eggs. There's a potato chip company. There are a bunch of potato farmers in Ireland where you can actually, with a QR code, snap that QR code at the back of that potato chip. I think it's called SpudNav, and it takes you to a picture of the field where those potatoes were grown.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you going to trust those potatoes, and are those potato chips going to taste a whole lot better? Absolutely.
Playing on people's emotions. Okay, but
Of course.
what
That's
from
what
your
marketers do.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so from your research though, what percent of the population of consumers is that important? Is that like critically like important to the sale, the purchase of that product? Because there's also another contingent that say it, but then when they get to the grocery store, they really don't care about it. It comes down to some other
Yeah.
factors. So can you break that difference down for us?
Yeah. And you're right. There's always a gap between stated and actual behavior. But if you look at during this pandemic, organics, sales of organics have gone through the roof. They actually haven't been able to keep up with demand. So consumers are looking at moving up sort of that certified value chain. So I think, it's that we're actually seeing that behavior. And if you look at different generations, certainly the younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, they're actually voting with their grocery dollar as well. If you look at dairy, for instance, milk, fluid milk, those sales are falling. And they're falling especially in those younger generations. And it's not like they're leaving the category, they're moving to plant-based. Why are they moving to plant-based? It's not because they're vegetarian or vegan, it's because they have this vision of factory farming and cows and, lower carbon footprint. So that's why they're moving.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and you're getting a lot of, unfortunately, we share the border with a very big country. And in the absence of Canadian farmers telling their story, some of the US stories are, taking that airtime, so to speak. And so, I think about videos like Dairy is Scary, which is just an awful video that some young girl in the US put together. It's very misleading. She's taken photos and put it all together. But last time I looked, there was like 50 million views on YouTube. And nobody's coming out and saying, hey, you know what? Like farmers look after their herds. Farmers look after their animals. They look after the land. But, unless you actually show it, you're going to have those sort of stories filling that gap because, consumers are Googling, like we're actually seeing them going online. You can see what people search for and they're looking for these sort of things.
Well, and are those people searching for information or affirmation of some of their perceptions? And the other part of that is, because I think I know what the answer is, but the second part of it is what can mainstream conventional agriculture, just farmers in general, what can we do to combat some of these pieces of misinformation that are out there?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, if it's an affirmation, people will find the information to support their position. That's the wonderful and scary thing of the internet. But if I look at, for instance, social media, a lot of people get their information on social media. If I look at ag, where is ag on social media? Twitter. And you're talking to yourself, right? I just watched the CCFI Canadian Food Institute talking about trust in ag. And, there's this total disconnect between where consumers get their information and where ag serves up information. And so consumers are on Instagram. They're not on Twitter. And so you've got all these commodity groups and, doing a great job speaking to themselves on Twitter, but that's not where the consumer is.
Okay. So to be fair though, there are some really, really influential, whether farmers or some groups that are doing some good work on Instagram. But is the messaging correct to connect with some of those consumers? And what information is the consumer actually looking for?
Well, I think some of it is like, I use the example of A&W, and I know that they're beloved and hated at the same time out in the sector. But I think, they're doing a good job right now telling the story of grass-fed and sustainable beef. And, what do they do? And they're doing it during COVID. So they're not out there with the big typical commercial production, but they're showing the ranchers walking, they're showing the conditions, talking about how they are stewards of the land. And, A&W is the best performing QSR right now in Canada as a result, I believe.
Okay, well, you brought up A&W. But they're also, they may be, providing a perception of transparency on how the product is being produced, but they're also not transparent on how much of that product is actually coming from Australia.
Yeah.
And so, and hey, I, like myself, repeatedly asked on what that number is, and they're not very transparent about it.
No,
So
I agree.
Right?
I agree. And they play a bit of a game on the hormone side. And that's why I said, I use A&W probably at my own peril because I know that they're very mixed in terms of that. But they're getting a message out and it's connecting with consumers. So maybe ag needs to take a bit of a page from that because it's working.
Okay, so I love a burger just as much as anybody else does. What about some of the work that McDonald's is doing in terms of some of their marketing? You've been in food marketing your entire career. How do you view campaigns like that where they've really, really put a flag in the ground in terms of trying to, from the ground up, work with farmers to show kind of what's going on the farm to consumers?
Yeah, and McDonald's is a great example because if you think like 10 years ago, they were at the forefront. They actually took more of their advertising dollars and put it behind not advertising their products, but advertising the inputs to their products. So they were showing that farmer who raised the beef. They were showing that potato farmer and the potato, that raised the potatoes that went into the French fries. So they were really at the forefront there. And, it made news when McDonald's actually had to go to the US for a brief period of time to get some beef, import some beef because they didn't have a consistent supply up in Canada during the early days of COVID. And so that made news beyond, the sector. It made consumer news. Yeah. So they've done a great job there too.
One of the bullet points in your report talks about beyond local, and we hear a lot about local food movement, and there's like the 100-mile diet, and there's things like that. Especially during COVID, we heard Alberta Premier Kenney yesterday talk about how buy local. You've got beyond local, localization of products and services. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so during COVID, our world's shrunk even more, and in some cases, local now is our neighborhood. And we want to support our neighbors. So that's the first point, and that's the whole buy local. But I think another thing's come out of this. Everybody at the beginning of the pandemic, they were starting their COVID victory gardens, raising their fruits and vegetables. So they got an appreciation, one, for how good fresh tastes, but two, just how hard it is. And so now we've seen a lot of money going into not just greenhouses, but vertical farming, where you can literally go from seed to, plate in days. And there's a lot of money, certainly in Ontario as well. We've got some big vertical farms starting, and Dalhousie Agri-Food Institute did a big Canadian study, and Canadians actually believe that food grown in greenhouses and vertical farms tastes as good as, right, in the ground. So that, I think there's a possibility for the first time that we could have year-round fresh. And I think that's really important when you look at food security issues. You look at all the food recalls that's happened south of the border. And I think that's food sovereignty and food security is going to be really important going forward.
But, so you've done some studies, some analysis with the consumer where you probably get their opinions on factory farming and how they feel about factory farming. Isn't a vertical farm in probably an old warehouse? Isn't that factory farming in its kind of truest definition?
Well, they call it vertical farming, so naming's everything. But I think when
Yeah.
consumers talk factory farming, they're thinking about the animals, right? I think that's where their head goes, and there's a belief, our farming are nowhere near the size of American farms and American factory farms. But in the consumer head, that's what they see. Whereas, vertical farms, it's, we're just talking fruits and vegetables. And, if you go on the site, like Plenty in the US, Elon Musk's brother Kimball has another big, I forget the name of his company, but you go online and see videos, and these things look beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous, and they're light filled, and they're very high tech and very lush.
Interested in what functional food 2.0 is.
Yeah, so that's eating for resiliency. So I think, all of us went into COVID thinking we were already as stressed and tired as we could be. And then we met Zoom, and we met lockdowns and missions and face masks. And, you see dentists talking about how people are grinding teeth in their sleep because, right, like we're stressed bunnies for good reason right now. And so we're seeing these huge increases of searches and products that are what I call naturally functional, that have vitamin D, vitamin C, to help with immunity and resilience, magnesium to help people sleep. And it's really about consumers knowing that they're in a battle for health and trying to arm themselves for that. So that's what we mean by eating for resiliency. And also starting to look at how do I sleep better, and what's the role of food and beverage there as well.
Okay. Okay. I like some of the titles here. They leave me very curious. The rise of Omnichannel.
Mm. Yeah, so omnichannel means, we've got this digital world and the physical world, like they need to be a seamless integration. So with COVID, there was this forced trial of online grocery, right? Especially in some of the urban centers. And, grocery shopping had been sort of the last thing to really go online because people actually like to do their own grocery shopping. But especially at the start of the lockdown, all generations, like even grandparents, got forced to try online grocery. And everybody was pleasantly surprised by the experience. It delivered better than they thought. And it's always been like the fruits and veggies. Everybody was always worried that, they wouldn't look as good as the ones they picked themselves. Well, grocers were really smart. They actually picked fruits and vegetables for the online orders first to overcome that. So there's been that real forced integration. And there's a lot of money going into the space now to allow for what, you can call shoppable recipes. So now that consumers are cooking more at home than they ever have before, they're ordering, they're doing meal planning, and there's always been this promise, but it's never really come through where, if I do all my meal planning online, wouldn't it be great if I could push a button and it automatically gets ordered and delivered? Well, that's starting to happen in the US. So Walmart, their Plus platform, They've just teamed up with a company called Side Chef, and you literally can do that. And they've got all these shoppable recipes, and you can do it by, type of food, type of diet. So you go through, you pick what you want, pick a button, goes through your Walmart Plus account, orders exactly how much you need, and it's delivered to you.
So there's been a real trend, or people exploring, as you were talking about, with online delivery. I think of like the Blue Aprons, the Hello Freshes, where essentially like it's delivered all the ingredients, and you just got to sort of put the final stage, the thing together. Is that something we're going to see more growth in the future, or has COVID kind of pushed it to its maximum market penetration and it'll sort of flounder from here? How do you see that?
Yeah, I call this, we're sort of in the third phase of meal kits, and meal kits, the sector's still not quite working. So the first time out, even the big players in the US went bankrupt. And then they said, okay, well, maybe it should be sold in a grocery store, right? So the consumers can actually pick what meal kits they want, because who knows a week ahead what you want to eat, right? So that was sort of meal kit 2.0. That hasn't been working either. And so now there's meal kit 3.0. So they've gotten a bump with the pandemic. But is it going to really work? I'm not sure. I'm talking to consumers, they see there's a lot of packaging waste. And if you're a from scratch cook, you know how to do it. And if you're not, it really doesn't save you the kind of time. And we're seeing a lot of cooking fatigue right now. Like the number one activity increase during COVID has been cooking, because we stopped. A lot of us stopped cooking from scratch.
Yeah.
So that's the number one, but we're now getting bored of our cooking.
You can only eat so much pasta. Like, you gotta have something else.
Yeah, the average consumer has 3 to 5 recipes that they just keep rotating through. So you're getting menu fatigue. And life's getting a little bit busier, and so the actual incidence of cooking from scratch is starting to fall a little bit again. Yeah.
And we've done some HelloFresh at our house, and I would say after doing it for a little while, I think that a lot we like a little bit of spice and things. Quite bland. You always have to add stuff to it. Quality seems to be going down as opposed to up. And you mentioned the waste. So I find there's some irony here, or maybe some hypocrisy built in, where, people are talking about how, we want to, we're concerned about the environment, but then you order HelloFresh and you get more cardboard than food. It is trying to cut all that cardboard down to do the recycling. It is waste is real.
And even garlic, which has its own natural packaging, has been removed and put in a little plastic cup, right?
Yeah.
But I will say that is one of the things we call out in our trend report as one of the positive legacies of COVID, and that's the return of the family mealtime. So I think that's going to be, that will continue. We've really reconnected with our families, and going into COVID, 50% of all eating occasions were solo on our own. And now, we're eating meals as a family quite often, not just breakfast and dinner, but also lunch. And people say, they've really enjoyed reconnecting with their family around the table. And it's become an activity for everybody to pitch in. So I do think that's going to be a positive, lasting legacy of COVID.
I agree. As somebody that was traveling about 50% of the time, I've had more meals with my family in the past 7 months than I did in the prior 7 years, I think, if I actually did the math. Grassroots movement, investing in soil health for industry and the environment. What do you see in there as a trend?
Well, this is interesting. I do the report with Len Kahn of Contact. So soil health is a trend that I've actually been seeing rising on the consumer side. And I said to Len, hey, when I talk about regenerative agriculture, that's kind of old news on the ag side, but it's starting to really bubble up into mainstream consumer side. And so if you look at, the soil is becoming kind of the hero of the story. So you look at documentaries like Kiss the Ground that's trending on Netflix. It's all about soil as the hero to save our planet. If you look at some of mainstream consumer packaged goods companies like General Mills, right? They are talking about, as part of their mission for some of their products, regenerative agriculture, and they've defined it with 3 pillars. So it's farmer resilience, soil health, and there was one other in there, maybe it was crop diversity. But so they're actually calling this out, and we're starting to see certifications that are regenerative organic. So it's like the next stage of organic. And on the ag side, we've seen, Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, actually being quite brave and going out there and saying, hey, eating beef can help heal the planet. So talking about how everything's really connected. And I say they were brave because they tested that campaign in downtown Toronto with millennials, and it on Facebook and Instagram had done a lot of crisis management and preparation. And you know what? People were interested. They sort of went to the belly of the beast and said, hey, you know what? Eating beef is not necessarily bad. And this is why. And it protects the grasslands and, carbon and soil health and all of that. And it turned out that the consumer actually wanted to know more, and it didn't blow up in anybody's face. And it started a really useful conversation, which, people, I'm talking to you right now from downtown Toronto. People don't understand how connected everything is that way. Everybody kind of stays in their own lane, and beef is bad or this is good, but it's far more nuanced and connected than that.
Yeah, we now have a situation where Chop Steakhouse, they have restaurants across the country. Their burgers are all CRSB labeled now. McDonald's announced last week all of their quarter pounders will be CRSB labeled. So we've got, fast food and high-end restaurant engaging and supporting that CRSB logo. So in terms of farmers and sustainability claims, that is really the flagship, the flagship for everybody to kind of aspire to, and a bit of the template. Next, you had next generation farming, accelerated integration of digital tech and agriculture. And I'm interested how all this ties into food and the reaction the consumer has to it.
Well, that was more of an ag trend, in fairness. So, and Len could certainly speak more eloquently about that. But I think it was the forced movement online of a number of things in farming. And will it go back? Will you be able to, why can't you order your seed and things like that online? And, maybe some of the suppliers there, it's more about sharing their knowledge and expertise rather than selling commodity goods. And, look at the new investment by TELUS and the announcement around, the whole TELUS Ag. I'm not totally sure what that's about, but they've definitely put a stake in the ground and said, this area is important. We're investing in it. And hopefully it comes with some high-speed internet for everybody in rural Canada as well.
Yeah, because earlier you mentioned vertical farming, and I've done a decent amount of reading on it. Some of those facilities are extremely high technologically advanced in terms of the water monitoring and things that they're doing. Whether it's vertical or horizontal, technology has a real space in agriculture, and I think sometimes that's not communicated enough to the consumer. But I'm worried that we are fearful that the response to it will be negative, because there also is a push for people to produce crops as if somebody did in 1917 as opposed to 2020, right? And sometimes these things, there is hypocrisy. Yeah. We want Little House on the Prairie, and we want, absolutely, but then we want to pay. We don't want to pay the price of those really small yield farms, and that's just not the way forward to feed the world anyway. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, but I think the good news was that that research said that consumers greenhouse versus vertical versus grown in the ground, to them it was equal. So I think that's interesting. And
Hmm.
again, lots of if you look at dairy and robotic milking and things like that, again, maybe if you showed the consumer the fact that these cows, they go, you know get themselves milked when they're ready, right?
Yeah.
Like that's pretty cool. But I can bet you a lot that your average consumer has no idea, and if they hear robotics and farming, they go, ugh. But
Right.
if they see that, what, hey, the animal's just kind of, Betsy's walking around, and when she feels like it's time to get, milk, she goes in, and like, isn't that cute and clever?
Yeah. Exactly. The one of the ones I haven't asked you about was actually the first one, and that
Mm-hmm.
is two Canadas, the
Yeah.
polarization of society.
That's
Talk
a
about
big
this one.
one. That's a big one. We're really seeing during this pandemic that there's two Canadas. So, half, and it literally splits in half. So half of people are worried that they're not going to be able to afford the food that they need. And they're largely people who are working in hospitality, food service, construction. We're seeing record use of food banks. So these are people who are just trying to make the rent for the month and get food on the table. And, food prices are going up. They were going up before the pandemic, and they're going up more now with all the additional protocols and everything, and the cost of doing business online. So food is getting more expensive. Then you've got the other half of Canada that actually has more discretionary income than ever before because they're not traveling. Expenses have gone down. They're not commuting. They're not getting their dry cleaning done because they're not wearing suits as much. So you've really got these two different groups. And they are going to react to food and to what they see as value in very different ways. So, half of consumers are going to be looking for a low cost option, more private label. The other half are craving experience. So they're going to want food with more of a story. They're going to be looking at trading up to what they see as better food, whether that's organic, whether that's certified humane.
Okay, so here's something for you. Okay, so I identify with this, like the where we got two Canadas based on affordability of food. Are the food companies that are in the middle, caught in the middle, are they just dead? Like, and I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, the mushy middle. Yeah, it's not going to be a good place to be. That's kind of what I think. You're going to have to appeal to one or the other. Now, and who knows how we get out of COVID, like from an economy standpoint. There's going to be a lot of debt. We're in a recession. What's that going to look like? Some people are still going to be struggling coming out of this. So yeah, I do think being in the middle may not be the best place. And I think even consumers with more discretionary income, they may do sort of a high-low strategy that we've seen adopted in fashion, right? So you'll go and you'll get your Joe Fresh turtleneck, and you'll splurge on the jacket to go over it. That sounds kind of dated in today's world. But I think consumers may start doing that a little bit more with food.
Cool stuff. Hey, JoAnn, I really appreciate you joining us. I always like talking about the food chain, and I appreciate you joining us here today to talk about your report that was just released here today. And all the best to you.
Great, my pleasure.
Okay, we'd love your feedback. You can keep on sending it to me. My email is shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the RealAg listener line 855-776-6147. Don't forget about RealAg Radio today on Rural Radio 147. We got a great lineup. We got the new OFA president on there. We are also going to have the top ag news stories of the day. Lots to discuss. Also, you're going to hear about some phosphate tariffs that the Department of Commerce in the U.S. has put on Morocco and Russia. And how does that impact the price of phosphate here in Canada? As well, tomorrow on the show, it's U.S. Thanksgiving, but it's not a holiday here in Canada. We got a show here for on Real Ag Live tomorrow. We're going to talk to Manitoba-based farmer Gunther Yoakum. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Live, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everyone.